All right, hi guys, welcome back. So we're going to step away from the machine for a little bit. We're actually going to put the primary head together for this Modix build. We don't have the secondary head for this one, so we're just going to be doing the primary. If you're going to be doing the secondary heads in these machines, just to make you aware, on the secondary head, everything in the brackets are reversed, they're mirrored. So the instructions online instruct you to put it together very similar to the same one. They do make a mention on it that it's a mirrored hot end. So bear in mind that when you're putting this together, when you're working on the second head, one of the first screws you put in is the one down in this lower corner. Because it's mirrored, this bracket is located on this side. So on the mirrored or second head, you're going to be putting the screw in this corner first, just simply because everything is flipped in reverse. That being said, we're going to move ahead. So for this, we're going to start with the aluminum block. We're going to start with the thermistor and the heater cartridge. We need the fixings kit, arrow kit bag. Now, when you open this, be very careful. I'm going to make a suggestion for both me and for you. Just leave your box open so you can just kind of dump your parts in there and find them, because there is a small grub screw in here. Once you drop it on the floor, it becomes very hard to find. Not that I have experience with that. So we're going to get our hardware in the aluminum block first. Grab the small Allen key. Just going to set it in the block on the side where the thermistor goes. And then we have our two black screws, which are going to go in where our heater core goes. Okay. If you notice on this block, it's got a notch on one side on the heater cartridge side, and it's got a small indent here where the wires will come out for the thermistor. So if we go put the thermistor in first, we can drop that in the hole. Wait till it comes out level at the bottom, and then fold over your wires into that notch at the top of the block. Tighten down the set screw to grab the thermistor. Now tighten it down until you feel it touch, and then maybe a quarter turn after that. You don't want this extremely tight because you don't want to start deforming the thermistor cartridge. You just want to grab it to the point where it's not going to come out until you unscrew this set screw. Heater cartridge is going to go in the same way. Heater cartridge goes in, flush at the bottom, fold your lines over at the top, and then you can hold it in that position while you tighten down the two screws on the side. Now with these screws, tighten the first one down till it touches. Do the same with the second one. And then just tighten the screws about a quarter turn each. Check your heater cartridge if it still moves, which this one here does. Do another quarter turn each screw. Check your heater cartridge, and when it grabs, that's enough. You don't need to tighten it any more than that. Now, with that being said, the Modix does include all three options for nozzles, the 0.4, the 0.6, and the 0.8. I'm going to be doing 0.4 in this one, so I'm going to leave my other nozzles just off to the side for right now. So thread your nozzle all the way in your volcano block. Once you thread it all the way in, back it out approximately one full turn so you can actually see a little air gap between the top of this nozzle and the bottom of the heater block. You want to see a little space in there. Once you have that in position, you can grab your throat, and we're going to be putting it in. This is your heat break. So your heat break should end up just above the volcano nozzle. So when we thread this in, I always thread it down all the way so I can feel that I've hit that nozzle on the bottom. If I'm not sure, Back the nozzle off, quarter turn, and then you should be able to rotate your heat break another quarter turn in. So you know for sure by doing this that this heat break is contacting this nozzle somewhere inside the block. If you have space in here, if this is just getting caught on a burr and is not quite going all the way down to the nozzle, it's going to start causing things like heat creep and stringing and problems with your volcano. You're not going to be able to get consistent extrusions. So you're going to want to make sure that you have these in contact at all times. So I've verified it at this point. I'm going to back this heat break out my half turn and tighten my nozzle back up a half turn. So after we get this in the machine, we are going to want to do a complete heat tighten on it. At this point, I'm going to grab it with a pair of adjustable pliers and a small 5mm wrench. And I'm just going to give it just a little bit of tension just to make sure that nothing shakes loose through the rest of the install process. At this point, we're going to start mounting our heat sink onto our throat. When we do our throat, it does come with some heatsink compound. I'm going to leave this for a customer, the next person who has this machine. I'm going to leave this for them to use. I have a bulk amount of it here. I'm actually using the one from Slice Engineering, but as long as it's a good grade heat compound, you should be okay. So with this, what you basically want to do is you want to cover the threads on the throat. You don't want to use an excessive amount. You just want to use a little bit on it. I usually chase around the threads at the very top. So once you have some on there, just grab a couple of Q-tips and I smear it into the threads. Again, use the Q-tip to make sure the threads are coated, but don't leave an excessive amount on the threads. You don't want it to ooze everywhere once you start threading on your heat break. So once that's in place, you're going to want to take your heat break, or sorry, your cooling, and just revolve that onto your throat. You may see some of that heat compound working its way down the threads. That's okay. Keep your Q-tip close on hand. You can clean it up afterwards just to make it look a little cleaner. It's good. You just don't want to leave it in a mess all over your hot end. So as you get down close to the break, you're going to notice that this is going to get tight and your wires are going to start to get very tight in the space between the two. Just be very careful as you're tightening them together. You don't want to break these wires off because you'll have to go take it apart and replace the parts. So right now I'm bottomed out in that throat. What I want is this is going to be the side of the machine towards the right. So this is going to face to the right side. What you want is this heater block. You want this to be perpendicular to this with the red wires heading out the back. So the quick way of taking care of that, I can loosen up my nozzle a little bit. I can rotate this around to where everything is going to set up nice and square. Tighten my nozzle back down again. Again, we are going to heat tighten this once we get this installed in the machine. So I basically want to tighten everything down to the point where I have a very tiny gap between the top of this nozzle and the bottom of the block. I can get about 2 pieces of paper in between this right now, and I can just start to see a little bit of the thread at the top of the block. So that's sitting in a place where I'm okay with it right now. At this point, I'm going to put this on, our silicone sock. I'm going to put this on just so that it's in location and we don't lose it. But we are going to have to remove it later when we do the heat tighten. But let's put that on so that everything is kept where it should be. Okay, and that's done. I'm going to set this aside for right now, and we're going to move on to our stepper motor. So again, Modix is very good. They have this one here marked E0. So when you pull this out, it is not going to be the same stepper motors as we've used in the rest of the machine to this point. It is going to be a slightly smaller one. You don't need the torque in the extruder as what we need through the rest of the machine. The first thing you want to do is note where the connector for your stepper motor is. This connector, when you lay your stepper motor on the table, make sure the connector is pointing towards you. That's going to be the bottom. So with the stepper motor connector towards you, these two bolts are going to go off to my left. Again, stepper motor pointed towards you, two screws on your left side. You want to grab your extruder bracket and lay that on first. That's going to be the bracket. So in this bracket, and I'll make special attention to this, there's one entry point here at the top which goes in this direction, and there's an entry point at the bottom which goes straight up and down. The one at the bottom is actually where the hot end is going to sit. So when this goes together, it is going to go together in this configuration. So this is going to be the bottom. So when we put this in, we're going to lay our bracket on, put this on, put our bracket on, and then we're going to put the one silver screw down in the bottom left corner. And where that's going to go is in the very lower right corner. At this point, I grab one of the 35mm long 3mm bolts, and I put it in the opposite corner of the stepper motor. I only do this for one reason, to keep everything square and make sure that I'm not blocking up any of my holes when I tighten down this one. So I'm going to tighten down this first screw. You don't have to overly tighten it, but you want to make sure it's not going to move through the rest of the process. Then you can take out that 35mm bolt that you just put in temporarily, and that's what you'll end up looking like. Next step to this is you're going to take your drive gear, which is located in the Titan Bag 1 RH. You're going to find a couple of parts in this bag. You're going to find two filament guides. If you look at the bottom of both of them, one is marked 1.75, the other one is marked 2.85. The 2.85, just set it aside with your spare nozzles. We're not going to need that in this configuration. This is being set up as a 1.75 filament machine. So we're going to need that shortly. This is the adjuster bolt that we're going to put a spring on it and use it to adjust the tension on our filament. And this is the gear that we're going to be using next. So back in that previous bag we opened up, there's another grub screw. We can grab that, put it on our Allen key, and thread it into our spur gear. Now, I'm doing something wrong here on purpose because I want to show you. If I was to put this on over my stepper gear right now, I could put this on and tighten it in. This bolt is still going to be exposed through the teeth of the spur gear, which means that when this gear meshes with it, you're going to end up stripping out this plastic gear. So when you do this, the grub screw that you're supposed to use with this spur gear is the silver one. If you'll see these two, the black one and the silver one is very slightly shorter. So when I put this in, similar to what we've done for the rest of the stepper motors, rotate the shaft around so the flat side is exposed to you. I have the flat side going in this direction. Put your grub screw closest to the stepper motor. Push it on the gear and then tighten it up. Now, you'll know if you're in the right place for it when you take your spur gear, put it in on your put it in the bearing up here in the upper right corner. When you hold the two of them down, when they're located properly, The top of this spur gear on the stepper motor should be flush with the top of this spur gear. In my case, I'm about 1 millimeter, maybe 2, a little low. Okay, so I'm happy with that alignment there. They're a little, no, hang on. Let me adjust that one more time. Our spur gear is now on, our drive gear is on, everything is set up and aligned properly. The next step, what we're going to do now is we're going to get our adjustment spring in place and our lever arm. So the next step to that is going to be to grab the small nut in the kit, put it all the way on the adjuster arm, put our spring on, and this is how it will go in. Our lever arm goes on next. There's a small dimple on the lever arm. That is going to go towards my left because this spring is going to set right over it. So set on our lever arm, set our spring in, and our adjuster bolt. When the adjuster bolt goes in, you will notice there's a knob here that sits in a channel cut in the plastic. So as you're doing the adjustment, you can adjust this knob and notice how the nut moves in or out to make the spring tighter or looser. As we're doing the assembly, leave this as loose as you can. It'll just help things align a little easier. Now, we can put this aside and we're going to go back to our heat break for a little bit. So on this heat break, we have our filament guide, which is going to set in this location here. Flat side towards the large aluminum extrusion, and this is going to help to guide filament straight down into the volcano hot end. Now, the one part we have to do with this is we have to cut and trim our ptfe tubing to go into this, into the bottom of our, down to our throat bottom. And then this is going to sit on the opposite end of it, but we still need the bottom of this guide to sit flat here. So very quickly, I use a ptfe cutter. They do give you lots of spare, so I cut about 1/3 of it. I can put the rest in my box for spare parts. Put this in my throat, set my hot end on it, my guide, and as you can see, I'm still left with a fair bit of space in between. So what you want to see is you want to see your ptfe tube in the bottom of your throat. You want your guide to go on. So what you're left with, this is how much more I have to cut off. You want this to contact the aluminum, but you still want the entire area inside lined with the ptfe tube liner. So once our ptfe tube is cut, you know that it's in there and it takes up the whole cavity. This is where we combine both. So we grab our small bearing that's in our kit. Oh, I emptied it in the box. Our bearing is going to go in the upper left corner here in our aluminum brake. That's going to fit down over the top of our spur gear. Now, when you're doing this, just be gentle. You may have to jiggle it just a little bit to get things to fall into place where they should be, but that's what you'll end up with when you're done at the end of the day. So, once we're in this location, we grab our screws. We have 3 silver screws here, all the same length, and we have 1 that is slightly shorter. We grab the slightly shorter one and our Allen key, and we put it in the lower right corner, right next to the screw that's already holding this bracket onto the stepper motor. When we tighten it in, We don't have to over tighten it. It just has to come down, make contact, and just make it snug. Because at the back, the only thing that's holding this screw is that little inset ferrule in the back of the plastic gear. If you tighten it too much, you will crack this gear. It just has to be snug, but not over tightened. The next step is grab one of your 35mm bolts, and you want to grab the little washer that has the teeth on the inside. That's going to go on here. So the one with the nut, or with the washer with the little teeth on the inside, this one goes through the spur gear. So this one is in the upper right corner. Snug, don't have to over tighten it. Now you can grab the other two 35mm M3 bolts and drop these in the last two holes. These are going all the way through to the stepper motor, but again, we don't have to over tighten them too much. Okay. That is our hot end done and complete. Now we're going to bolt on some of the other requirements, and we're going to get this on our machine. These are some extra parts that are not required. We can just drop these in the box and get them out of our way. Now, so the next two steps that we're going to do are going to be our fans. So our fans in this case, the kits that we have, and I can't explain this one, the kits that these come with have the pointed edge, looks like a wood screw, but it's not. These are supposed to go through the fan and actually attach them to the heatsink. Now, I've done quite a few of these, and as I tighten them in, this one here is actually grabbing, but I've been finding that some of them are not grabbing lately. So as an alternative, if this doesn't go in and tighten in for you, like, yeah, see this one here is not grabbing onto the aluminum at all. I can't explain why, because it looks like it should, but it's not. So as an alternative, if it's not going in there, I will give you an alternative that you can use. I've grabbed a couple of M3 by 10 and M3 by 12 Allen bolts. Most of the time the 10 will work, sometimes the 10 will work. Most of the time the 10 is going to, or the 12 is going to be your better option. So I just grab a standard 12 mil. And in place of the screws, I drive the bolts down. And I just put them in until they hold the fan exactly where you want it to be. Don't go any tighter, because it's possible to start deforming the aluminum heatsink. So it's my preference to do it that way. I know there are people that are watching this video that are probably saying I shouldn't. In an alternative, when you're in the situation where you're assembling it, you may not have another option for screws. It is an alternative that you can use. Okay, so there's our hot end, almost completely done. A couple of quick steps to go. Next, we're going to work on our blower motor. Modix includes a printed duct for you. So this will go together with the fan sitting inside the duct, and the duct will get bolted to the bracket. So I usually keep my wire up, because when I bring the wire to hook into the rest of the hot end, I try and bring most of my wires over the top of my assembly, just to avoid getting caught or hit by getting caught in a print or getting burnt by the hot end. So the blower motor goes together with the M4 by 25 bolts. The PEM nuts are already installed on the red bracket. So you just have to get it in and started. Same thing on the lower side. Grab your Allen key and you can just snug them down. Okay. So the next step on this is going to be the M4 by 10. And the M4 by 10s are going to be used to hold this bracket to the hot end. Now just have a quick look at the clearances in the back, make sure these bolts are not hitting your fan or anything like that. When you do the initial setup for this, you will be able to tune it obviously when you're doing. Make sure when you set the height on this, you want the lower edge of your fan to come roughly level with the bottom of this silicone sock. You don't want it to come any lower than that, because then the fan itself, the blower duct, may start hitting your print. You want to try and avoid that if you can. So snug but not overly tight. That is the completed primary hot end assembly. We have our thermistor is on the blue lines, our heater cartridge is on the 2 red lines heading towards the back, stepper motor connections on the bottom, our print fan is here, and our cooling fan is coming right out of the top here. So all these will come back to the back of the assembly on this, and we'll be hooking those up in due time. All right, so the next part of this, we're going to do our BL Touch install. This is the BL Touch bracket, which is going to mount to the gantry on the machine. Here's our BL Touch version 3.1. And then we have 2 bolts, 2 nuts, and a small wiring harness. So when we're doing this, let's put our wiring harness in first. Same as a standard BL Touch. Modix already has the proper connectors placed on the other end for you, so they will hook into the harness. When you install this, you're going to look at your bracket this way. Install your BL Touch so your wires are under the remainder of the bracket. So you'll notice the 2 holes are a little towards the right, so put the wires out towards the left. Drop a bolt in place and spin the nut on. These are nylon lock nuts, so what you will find the easiest to do with these afterwards, just grab them with a pair of pliers and then tighten them down with an Allen key. Again, bear in mind, these are, the BL Touch itself is plastic, so you're not going to want to over tighten it too much. Snug, but not over tight. Just have to grab the correct Allen key for this. There we go. So that is our first 2 sub-assemblies done that we are going to put on our midhead. So this other piece that's going to come in the same packaging as these other red brackets, this is actually the filament guide that's going to be mounted at the very top of that gantry, and we'll get to that when we get there. Keep that one close on hand. We will need that one momentarily. Other than that, the rest of these screws we'll be using as we get into the rest of our install. So we'll see you back at the machine. Okay, so we're back at the machine. The first thing I'm going to do right now, just to get it out of the way, is our filament guide. Okay, filament guide's in place. Then I'm going to put the BL Touch in place. That's going to go in with 2 more of the M3 screws with a flat washer, and they go in these middle screws, or the middle PEM nuts, right in the center of the gantry. So with this BL Touch in place here, I'm not actually going to tighten these screws up. I'm just going to let it hang for a second. There's a rough setup I'm going to do for it, but for right now it's not going to create any problems just sitting out of the way. So the next step, we're going to grab our M8 conical screws. These are going to go through the top of this bracket, and they're going to mount straight into these four. So as I've been doing in most cases with these, I don't tighten them up all the way. I put the first two in, kind of holds it mostly in place. Spin in the other two. And then give it a little shake as you're tightening it up, just to make sure everything seats out properly. Okay, so just going to move down here a little bit. You'll notice that this BL Touch is actually hanging well below the nozzle. What I usually do to set these up initially is I'll bring the BL Touch up. So through the miracle of television, you may or may not notice the BL Touch is mounted slightly differently than what I did in the last segment. Basically what happened was this bracket, the way the pictorial is online, it's not extremely clear. I goofed it up. So when you install this BL Touch bracket, there's a thin side here where the nuts and bolts are close. The cable connection and the BL Touch both go on the thin side. Here's the reason why. Because when this bracket moves up and down for adjustment, you want to make sure that the BL Touch bracket and the BL Touch itself misses the spur gear and the nozzle assembly here on the side. So my bad in the last segment. It's one of the recommendations why I say watch the whole video first before you actually start building. So then you're not like me, you don't have to do it twice. So getting back to what I was going to show you, assuming your BL Touch will move freely up and down all the way, what I generally will do when I initially do the setup is I take the pinpoint of this BL Touch and I set it at the same height as the bottom of this silicone sock. So that even through initial calibration, the pin will still come down far enough so it'll hit the bed so that the bed will not hit the nozzle. So once you have it set approximately at that height, you can just tighten up these two bolts and then you're good to move forward with the process. Nothing will change in an extent to this point where doing this as an initial adjustment will affect anything. There is part of that calibration jig that Modix sends out with their machines. You will follow that through the calibration process and you will set up the appropriate height for the BL Touch. I just want to get it here so that I can make everything function and at least do electronics testing on it before I move forward with the calibration. All right, so we're going to do a little bit of housekeeping. We're back at the machine right now. So a couple of little things that haven't gotten done up until this point. We're going to actually start putting on our decorative panels. As we start to enclose this machine, we're going to want to make sure all the little details are done. So if you haven't done them up until this point, just follow along and we'll get everything complete. So this, although what it looks like is a grounding cable, it's actually for noise discharge. As 7/8 stepper motors are moving all simultaneously, they can tend to create a little bit of resonance noise. This is basically meant to use the build plate as an antenna and drain all of that noise out through the ground plug in your electrical system in your building. As it does that, just helps to keep everything a little neat and clean. You don't get any mystery steps or anything like that. So where this is going to go, it's on the V3 models. It actually bolts to the very side of the build plate. So there's a small screw towards the rear of the build plate, and it just takes an M3x8 bolt, I have a washer on it to make sure that I have good connection to it, make sure that I get a good tight connection. I'm going to bring this out, hold it just alongside the bed as I tighten it up. And that's my connection done. So again, we're going to leave this in the very bottom of the Modix. We don't have to worry about it right now, but once we get the panels on the side, we're not going to be able to do anything with it at that point. So the next step we need to do is we need to prep a couple of pieces. There's some 2 pieces of 2040 extrusion. I think they're 612 millimeters. It's about the only 2 pieces of extrusion left, minus the top cap. But what these are basically going to do is bolt in between the frames at this location here and at a similar location slightly higher at the bottom. And these are going to help to support the decorative panels. And they're also going to act as mountings for the magnets and accessories for the doors. So once you take these 2 extrusions, you're going to find 4 red plates like this, and you're going to find 8 conical screws. And all you simply do is put these plates on the end of the 2040 extrusions. So once you have them bolted together, what you're going to want to do then is to grab the M5x50 50 bolts and appropriate Allen keys. These are going to go in place between the 2 pieces of extrusion here and here. Sometimes it's a little bit of a trick to get everything aligned so it all sits properly. Just take your time. Everything will work. So the only purpose of this particular panel in this case is just to provide support for the bottom of the decor panel at the top of the machine. You do actually mount the magnets for the door on the back of it if you have the enclosure kit. So this one here has 3 slide-in T-nuts across the top. All right, so 2 on this side. Now, in this top panel here, there's 2 additional holes. These here are going to be for the L brackets to mount the LCD panels in. I don't have to put the T-nuts in these right now. You can do it at a later point in time. It's whatever's easier for you. So following the pattern we were doing before, if we just lay our panel in place, do a rough lineup of our slide-in T-nuts. We're going to basically do the same process with the large panel at the very bottom of the machine. This is going to come down here. Once this gets mounted, the control box for the bed heat control is going to come through these 2 holes here. So when you come back, I'm going to have the bottom decor panel installed. I'm going to have the heater control box mounted in here as well. To mount the heater control box, it's only 4 screws, so I'm sure you guys can see that. Then we're going to move on. We're going to start mounting up the LCD and start finalizing some of our electronics hookup. So we'll see you next time.